They found the human surrounded by cubs. She opened her eyes to a home that had chosen her. The patrol ship moved slowly through the field of broken metal and floating debris. Commander stood at the front window of the bridge, his silver-streaked fur catching the dim light from distant stars. He had seen many destroyed ships in his 40 years of service. He knew what death looked like when it drifted through space. The human vessel had been torn apart completely. Burn marks covered the twisted metal pieces. Pirates had done this work, could tell from the pattern of the damage. They had attacked fast and hard, taking what they wanted and leaving nothing but destruction behind. "No life signs detected," said his young second officer. Her ears were flat against her head as she studied her scanner. The attack happened at least 6 rotations ago, maybe more. Nodded slowly. He had not expected survivors. No one could survive 6 days in the cold emptiness between stars, not without power, not without air. The laws of the universe were clear about such things. "We will document the wreckage and report it to the council," he said. "Mark the location for recovery teams." Claws clicked against her console as she worked. Then she stopped, her ears lifted slightly. "Commander," she said, her voice strange and uncertain, "I am detecting something." Turned to look at her. "What is it?" "Heat, very faint heat coming from that section." She pointed at the screen where a small escape pod was visible. It was wedged between 2 large pieces of the destroyed hull. "The pod has no power, no active systems, but something inside is producing heat." "That is not possible," said. He walked closer to the screen and studied the readings himself. The heat signature was barely there. It flickered in and out like a dying flame, but it was real. "Should I ignore it?" asked. Thought about the laws and protocols he was supposed to follow. He thought about the reports he would have to file if he delayed their mission. He thought about all the sensible reasons to continue on their way and leave this mystery unsolved. Then he thought about a human soldier named who had pulled him from a burning transport ship many years ago. Hands had burned and bled from the effort, but he had not stopped. He had not calculated the risk or considered the protocols. He had simply refused to let die. "Bring us alongside the pod," ordered. "We are going to open it." The crew worked quickly. Magnetic clamps grabbed the escape pod and pulled it free from the wreckage. The outer door was frozen shut, damaged by the cold and the impact of the attack. It took 3 crew members with cutting tools to force it open. Was the first to look inside. The pod was small and dark. Emergency lights had died long ago. Frost covered every surface like white paint, and in the center, curled into a ball no larger than a cub, was a human female. Her skin had turned pale blue where the cold had touched her most. Ice crystals hung in her dark hair. She was not moving. She did not appear to be breathing. "She is dead," one of the crew members said softly, but had learned long ago that humans were not easy to kill. He stepped into the pod, ignoring the bitter cold that bit at his fur, and pressed his hand against her throat. Nothing. He waited. Still nothing. He was about to pull away when he felt it. A pulse, weak and slow and impossible but real. Her heart was still beating. "Get the medical team," said sharply. "Now she is alive." The crew members stared at him with wide eyes, but they moved quickly. Within minutes, the human was being carried through the corridors of the patrol ship toward the medical bay. Followed his mind full of questions. How had she survived? The pod had no power, no oxygen recycling, no heat. She should have frozen solid within the first day. Yet here she was, somehow still clinging to life with the stubborn determination that seemed to define her species. He noticed something else as they carried her. She was clutching a crack against her chest with frozen fingers. Even unconscious, even nearly dead, she had not let go of it. In the medical bay, the ship's physician took over. Was old and experienced, with patches in his fur and a calm manner that came from decades of dealing with emergencies. but even he seemed surprised by what he was seeing. "Her core temperature is dangerously low," he reported as he worked. "Severe hypothermia, possible frostbite on her extremities, oxygen deprivation that should have caused permanent brain damage." He paused, checking his readings again. "But her vital signs are stabilizing. Her body is fighting back." "How is that possible?" asked. She had followed them to the medical bay and was watching through the observation window. "Humans are strange creatures," said. "Their bodies are fragile in many ways. Their skin tears easily. Their bones break under pressure that would barely bruise but their will to survive." He shook his head slowly. "I have never seen anything like it." They worked through the night to save her. Slowly, carefully, they raised her body temperature. They treated her damaged tissue. They gave her oxygen and fluids and everything else her body needed to heal. And through it all, she dreamed. Pointed this out to near morning, when they were both exhausted, and the human was finally stable. "Her brain activity shows she is dreaming," the physician said. "Even now, after everything her body has been through, her mind is creating stories, images, experiences that are not real but feel real to her." Looked at the human through the observation window. She seemed so small lying there, so impossibly fragile, yet she had survived things that would have killed any 10 times over. "What kind of species dreams while dying?" asked quietly. Considered the question. Perhaps the kind that refuses to accept death as the end. Perhaps the kind that always believes there is something more to live for. They finally managed to read the crack she had been holding. Her name was. She was 26 Earth years old. She worked as someone who studied life on other planets. She had been the only crew member from the research vessel Horizon's Edge to reach an escape pod. The records showed that she had activated the pod's emergency systems herself, even as the ship exploded around her. She had fought to survive even when survival seemed impossible. Found himself wondering about this human named. What had driven her to keep fighting? What dreams had filled her mind as the cold crept in? What had she been holding onto so tightly that not even death could make her let go? He would have to wait for her to wake up to find out. But something told him that this human was going to change things. He could feel it in his old bones, the same way he had felt the truth of things during the war. Was not just a survivor, she was something more. He just did not know what yet. In the medical bay, surrounded by machines that monitored her slowly strengthening heartbeat, continued to dream. And somewhere in those dreams, she was still holding onto something precious, something worth fighting for, something that refused to let her go, even when the universe tried its hardest to tear her away. The stars continued to drift past the patrol ship's windows. The cold darkness of space stretched on forever in every direction. But inside the ship, warmth was returning to one small human body. And with it, the faint but steady rhythm of a heart that simply refused to stop beating. They found the human surrounded by cubs. She opened her eyes to a home that had chosen her. The patrol ship was never meant to carry children. It was a military vessel designed for border patrols and emergency responses. The corridors were narrow. The rooms were small. Everything was built for efficiency, not comfort. But the Starward Dawn had been given a special mission 6 rotations before finding. Pirates had destroyed a colony on a small moon, killing most of the adults and leaving 12 children without parents or homes. The cubs were too young and too traumatized to travel on regular ships, so Commander had agreed to take them aboard and deliver them to the refugee center on Prime. Now those 12 children wandered the ship like small ghosts. They asked endless questions. They explored every corner and corridor. They refused to sleep at the proper times, and most of all, they watched. On the 3rd day after was brought aboard, discovered what they had been watching. He found 6 of them pressed against the observation window of the medical bay, their small faces reflected in the glass as they stared at the unconscious human inside. They did not speak. They did not play. They simply watched her with an intensity that made uncomfortable. "She is not going to do tricks for you," he said, trying to sound stern but not harsh. "She is healing. You should be resting." The smallest cub turned to look at him. Her name was, and she was barely 4 rotations old. Her amber eyes were too big for her face, and her fur was still soft with youth. "She saved the baby," said. Blinked, "What do you mean?" Appeared at his side, holding a. Her expression was strange and sad. "We recovered more data from the escape pod, Commander. Video recordings from the ship's cameras before it was destroyed." She hesitated, clearly not wanting to continue, but needed to know. "Tell me," he said. "The human was not alone during the attack," said quietly. "There was a family on her research ship, 2 scientists and their infant daughter. They had been working with her team for several months." Felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He was beginning to understand. "When the pirates breached the hull, the parents were killed almost immediately," continued. "The human grabbed the infant and ran. The video shows her fighting through smoke and fire, carrying the cub against her chest. She made it to the escape pod just before the ship exploded." The cubs at the window were all looking at him now. Even the older ones, the ones who tried to act like adults, had tears forming in their eyes. "The escape pod system was not designed for physiology," said. "The cold was too much for the infant, but the human," her voice broke slightly. "The human wrapped her own body around the cub. She tried to keep her warm with her own heat. She held her until the very end." Closed his eyes. He understood now why the cubs were watching so intently. "Did the infant survive?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, the cold was too severe, but the human kept her alive for 3 days longer than should have been possible. 3 days of holding her, protecting her, trying to save her." Paused. "The human was willing to die for a child that was not even her own species." Tugged at sleeve. "She tried to save the baby," the little one repeated. "She is a good person." Did not know what to say. After that day, the cubs began holding vigil outside the medical bay. Tried to stop them at first. He assigned extra duties to the older children. He scheduled additional rest periods for the younger ones. He even threatened to lock the medical bay corridor if they did not obey. Nothing worked. The cubs simply waited until the adults were busy with other things, and then they crept back to their posts like small, determined soldiers. They sat on the floor outside the medical bay door. They took turns watching through the observation window. They refused to leave. And they brought gifts. One of the older boys at 11 rotations brought a blanket from his destroyed home. It was the only thing he had managed to save from the attack. The fabric was worn and faded, but he placed it carefully on the floor outside the medical bay like an offering. Drew a picture of the human with bright colors that she had found somewhere in the ship's supplies. In the drawing, had kind eyes and a big smile, even though had never seen her awake. When asked why she had drawn her that way, said that she looked like a mother, the gentle creatures that protected their young with fierce love. A quiet boy of 8 rotations who rarely spoke to anyone brought a small carved animal. It was made of dark wood, worn smooth by years of handling. He would not explain where it came from or why it mattered. He simply placed it on the floor next to his blanket and sat down to wait. The physician watched all of this with quiet wonder. "They have adopted her," he told one evening as they both observed the cubs through the window. "Cubs do this sometimes after great loss. They find something or someone to focus all their need for safety on. A person, an object, an idea. It helps them survive when everything else has fallen apart." "But she is unconscious," pointed out. "She cannot protect them or comfort them. She does not even know they exist." Gave him a long, thoughtful look. "Does that matter? She died trying to save a cub she had no connection to, no duty toward. She just did it because the cub needed saving." The old physician paused. To a child who has just lost everything, that kind of love might mean more than anything else in the universe. Watched the cubs through the window, had fallen asleep leaning against shoulder, was still staring at the observation glass with his sad, quiet eyes. The others were arranged in a loose circle, as if they were protecting something precious. "What happens when she wakes up?" asked. "I do not know," admitted. "Humans are unpredictable. She might be grateful for their attention. She might be overwhelmed. She might not remember anything about the attack or the cub she tried to save. And if she remembers," was silent for a long moment, "then she will need comfort as much as they do. Perhaps they can help each other." The days passed slowly, remained unconscious as her body healed from the damage the cold had done. The cubs continued their vigil, taking turns, bringing more small offerings, refusing to give up hope that she would wake. Found himself checking on them more often than necessary. He told himself it was just his duty as commander. These were children under his protection, after all. He needed to make sure they were eating properly and getting enough rest. But really, he was curious. He wanted to see what would happen when the human finally opened her eyes. He wanted to know if it was right about them needing each other. On the 8th night, asked him a question that he could not answer. "When she wakes up," the little one said, her amber eyes serious, "will she stay with us?" Did not know what to say. The truth was complicated, was human. She belonged with her own people on her own worlds. There was no reason for her to stay with a ship full of soldiers and orphaned cubs. But looking at its hopeful face, he could not bring himself to say any of that. "We will see," he said instead. "We will have to wait and see." Nodded slowly, as if this was the answer she had expected. Then she turned back to the observation window and continued her watch. Somewhere inside the medical bay, dreams continued. And somewhere inside those dreams, she was still holding onto something precious. Something that connected her to the cubs who were waiting for her. Something that none of them understood yet. But they would, soon enough they would. They found the human surrounded by cubs. She opened her eyes to a home that had chosen her. Woke on the 9th day. She did not wake slowly like had predicted. She did not drift up through layers of confusion and medicine. One moment she was still and silent, lost in whatever dreams humans dreamed. The next moment, her eyes snapped open with a sharp awareness that made drop the scanner he was holding. "The cub," she rasped. Her voice was rough and broken from 9 days without use. "Where is the cub?" Froze where he stood. He had been checking her vital signs, expecting another quiet day of slow healing. He had not been ready for this. Behind him, through the observation window, the 6 cubs who had been keeping their daily watch pressed closer to the glass. Small hands were flat against the window, had risen to his feet, was staring with his quiet, intense eyes. Tried to sit up. Her body refused to obey. 9 days of unconsciousness had stolen the strength from her muscles. She collapsed back onto the medical platform with a sound of frustration that was almost a growl. "Where is the cub?" she demanded again. This time her voice cracked on the final word, breaking like something fragile. Was a physician who had delivered bad news many times in his long career. He had learned to say terrible things gently, to wrap hard truths in soft words. But looking at its eyes, which were dark and fierce and burning with a hope so fragile it hurt to see, he found that all his gentle words had disappeared. "The cub did not survive," he said simply. "The system was not compatible with physiology. You kept her alive longer than anyone could have expected, but in the end she was too small, too young." Stared at him. For a long moment, nothing happened. She just looked at him with those burning eyes, as if waiting for him to tell her something different. As if waiting for him to say that he had made a mistake, that the cub was fine, that everything was going to be okay. But could not say those things, so he said nothing. Then closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her temples and into her dark hair. She did not make a sound. She did not sob or cry out. She simply lay there with her eyes closed and let the tears fall in silence. Did not know what to do. He had comforted many patients over the years, but this felt different. This felt like a grief too large for any words to reach. He was still trying to think of something to say when the door opened. Walked into the medical bay as if she had every right to be there. She was 4 rotations old and had not yet learned that some doors should stay closed. She had not yet learned that adults sometimes needed to be alone with their pain. She saw lying on the medical platform. She saw the tears. She saw the way his shoulders were shaking with silent sobs. Knew what that shaking meant. She had felt it herself after losing her mother. She had felt the weight of grief that was too heavy for words. So she did what her mother had always done for her. She walked to the medical platform and began to climb. It was not easy for someone so small, but was determined. She pulled herself up using the edge of the platform and the frame of the equipment beside it. When she finally made it to the top, she was breathing hard from the effort. But she did not stop to rest. She pressed her small, warm body against its back. She wrapped her short arms around the human as far as they would reach. She buried her face in strange, furless skin and held on with all her strength. Went completely still. For a moment, thought she might push the cub away. She might be too lost in her grief to accept comfort from a stranger. She might be too broken to feel anything except pain. But then slowly, his hand came up and covered small paw. She did not speak. She did not open her eyes, but she held onto that small paw like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. The other cubs did not need an invitation after that. Came through the door next, carrying the blanket from his destroyed home. He walked to the medical platform and draped it gently over both ends. Then he sat down on the edge of the platform with his back against its legs, positioning himself like a small guardian. Followed, he still carried his carved animal, the one he had refused to explain to anyone. He walked to his side and carefully placed the small figure in her palm. Then he folded her fingers around it with serious, gentle movements. One by one, the other cubs entered. They arranged themselves around like stars forming around a new sun. They did not speak. They did not ask questions or demand explanations. They simply offered the only thing they had to give: their presence. Commander found them like that an hour later. He had been searching for the cubs after someone reported that they were no longer at their usual post outside the medical bay. He had expected to find them causing trouble somewhere, or perhaps hiding in one of the ship's storage rooms. He had not expected this. Lay at the center of a pile of sleeping cubs, was still pressed against her back, sat at her feet like a guard, had curled up near her head, his small body rising and falling with peaceful breaths. The others were scattered around her, each finding their own spot to rest. Was awake. Her eyes were open now, red from crying but no longer weeping. She was staring at the ceiling with an expression could not quite read. "They would not leave," she whispered when she noticed him standing there. "I tried to tell them that I am not. I could not save." Her voice broke. "I could not save her." "No," agreed quietly. "You could not. The universe is cruel that way. It takes the ones we fight hardest to protect." He looked at the cubs arranged around her, small bodies pressed close, small hands holding on, small hearts beating in peaceful sleep. "But these children lost everything 3 weeks ago," he continued. "Their parents, their homes, their whole sense of safety. They have been drifting since then, looking for something to anchor them." He paused. "And then they found you." Shook her head slightly, careful not to disturb the sleeping cubs. "I am not an anchor. I am barely holding myself together." "Maybe that is true," said, "but you tried to save a cub who was not yours. You wrapped your body around her and held on until the cold took you both." His voice softened. "To a child who has lost everything, that kind of love is the safest thing in the universe." Stirred against his back, making a small sound in her sleep. looked down at the tiny paw still clasped in her hand. She studied it for a long moment, as if seeing it for the first time. "I do not know what to do," she admitted. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "I do not know how to help them. I do not even know how to help myself." "Perhaps you do not need to know," said. "Perhaps you just need to be here, to stay, to let them hold onto you the way you held onto that cub in the cold." Closed her eyes. More tears slipped out, but these were different, quieter, gentler. "I do not want to hurt them," she said. "I do not want to make them love me and then leave." Considered this for a moment. "Then do not leave." It was a simple thing to say. But's eyes opened again, and in them was something that had not been there before. A tiny spark of hope. Around her, the cubs continued to sleep. They did not know about the conversation happening above their heads. They did not know about the decision that might be forming in the human's heart. All they knew was that they were warm and safe and close to someone who had been willing to die for a child she did not know. And for now, that was enough. They found the human surrounded by cubs. She opened her eyes to a home that had chosen her. 2 weeks passed on the patrol ship. Grew stronger each day. Her human body was stubborn and determined, fighting to repair what the cold had damaged. Continued to marvel at her recovery. He ran tests and checked readings and shook his head with wonder at the results. "Your species should not be able to survive what you survived," he told her one morning. "And yet here you are, walking around as if nothing happened." Smiled slightly. It was still a sad smile, but it was a smile. "Humans are hard to kill. We are too stubborn to know when we should give up." The cubs followed her everywhere. When she walked through the corridors, they walked with her. When she ate meals in the common area, they sat around her like a protective circle. When she rested in her small quarters, at least 3 of them could be found nearby, playing quietly or simply watching her sleep. Observed all of this with interest. He had commanded soldiers and managed crews for decades. He understood loyalty and duty, but this was something different. This was not about orders or obligations. This was about love. "You do not have to let them follow you everywhere," he told one evening. She was sitting in the common area, trying to braid fur with her clumsy human fingers. The little one sat perfectly still, her eyes closed with contentment. "I do not mind," said. "They are," she paused, searching for the right word. "Healing, watching them heal helps me heal too." Settled into a chair across from her. The ship hummed quietly around them, carrying them all closer to their destination. "We will reach Prime in 3 days," he said. "The refugee center there is well prepared for the cubs. They will be placed with foster families if any can be found. If not, they will go to the group home." His hand stopped moving in fur. "The group home," she repeated. "It is a good place," said. "Clean, safe. The workers there care about the children." He paused. "But it is not a family, it is not a home, it is just a place to wait until something better comes along." Was quiet for a long moment. Had opened her eyes and was looking up at her with a worried expression, as if she could sense that something important was being discussed. "What about me?" finally asked. "You will be transferred to the human embassy. They will arrange transport back to Earth or to whatever colony you prefer." Kept his voice neutral, professional. Your skills are in demand throughout the sector. You will have many options for your future." Nodded slowly. She looked down then at the other cubs who had gathered nearby. Was pretending to read something but his ears were turned toward the conversation. Sat in the corner, his carved animal clutched in his hands, his quiet eyes watching everything. "I see," said softly. That night she could not sleep. She found herself in the observation deck, staring out at the endless stars. The universe stretched before her, vast and cold and completely indifferent to the small creatures who lived within it. She had always known this. She had built her career on studying how life survived despite that indifference. But knowing something and feeling it were very different things. She remembered the weight of the cub in her arms. She remembered the desperate attempt to keep her warm as the cold crept in from every direction. She remembered the moment when the small body had stopped moving and the terrible silence that had followed. She had welcomed the cold after that. She had been ready to let it take her too. Living in a universe where she had failed seemed like too much to bear. And yet here she was, still alive, still breathing, surrounded by cubs who looked at her like she was the answer to every question they had ever asked. "You are thinking about leaving." Turned, stood in the doorway, his young face caught between childhood and something older. He had lost much of his innocence in the attack that killed his parents. It showed in his eyes. "I am thinking about many things," she said carefully. Crossed the observation deck and stood beside her, looking out at the same stars. "When my parents died, I thought I would never feel safe again. I thought safety was something that belonged to the old world, and the old world was gone forever." Said nothing, she just listened. "But then we found you," continued, "and I watched you cry for a cub you had known for only 3 days, a cub who was not even your own species." He turned to face her. "And I thought, this is what safety looks like, not the absence of danger, just someone who would die trying to protect you." It began, but he kept talking. "Calls you mother when she thinks nobody is listening," he said quietly. "Gave you his father's carving. It was the only thing he had left of him, and he gave it to you. The others," he shrugged. "We have all lost everything. We are all looking for something to hold on to." His voice cracked slightly, and suddenly he looked like the child he still was. "Please do not make us lose you too." Did not sleep at all that night. When the ship docked at Prime the next morning, she stood in the airlock with her small bag of belongings. The cubs had lined up to say goodbye. Was crying small hiccuping sobs that she tried to hide by pressing her face into his side. His face was blank and empty, but his hands were shaking. The others were silent, their ears drooping, their eyes fixed on the floor. Commander approached her. "The transport to the human embassy leaves in 2 hours. I can escort you there if you wish." Looked at him, then she looked at the cubs. "What would I need to do?" she asked. Blinked. "I am sorry." "If I wanted to stay," said. Her voice was steady now, certain in a way it had not been before. "If I wanted to apply for guardianship, what would I need to do?" Silence filled the airlock. His head snapped up. Her tear-streaked face was suddenly transformed by a hope so raw and bright that it was almost painful to witness. Studied for a long moment. "You are human. Guardianship laws do not typically allow for cross-species adoption. The process would be long and difficult. There is no guarantee of success." "I do not care about guarantees," said. She knelt down, bringing herself to the cubs' eye level. "I care about them. I care about making sure they do not spend the next decade in a group home, wondering if anyone will ever choose them." Her voice softened. "I know what it is like to be unchosen. I will not do that to them." Threw herself at, wrapping her small arms around her neck with fierce determination. The other cubs followed, surrounding her in a tangled pile of fur and tears and desperate hope. Watched the scene with an expression that might have been a smile. "Well then," he said, "I suppose we have some paperwork to do." Held the cubs close and made a silent promise to whatever powers governed the universe. She could not bring back the cubs she had lost. She could not undo the terrible things that had happened to any of them. But she could choose to stay. She could choose to fight. She could choose to love these broken children with the same stubborn determination that had kept her alive in the cold darkness between stars. And that was exactly what she intended to do. They found the humans surrounded by cubs. She opened her eyes to a home that had chosen her. The guardianship hearings took 4 months. Learned more about laws than she had ever wanted to know. She filled out endless forms and attended dozens of meetings. She sat through interviews where officials asked her the same questions over and over, as if hoping she would give different answers. Why did she want to adopt children? How would she support them? Did she understand the cultural differences? Could she provide a stable home? She answered every question honestly. She did not pretend to have all the answers. She simply told them the truth. These children had chosen her, and she was choosing them back. Not everyone believed she could do it. Some officials thought a human had no place raising cubs. Some thought she was acting out of guilt over the cubs she could not save. Some thought she would change her mind after a few months and abandon the children to an even worse fate. But did not give up. She had survived freezing darkness. She had held on to life when every logical reason said she should let go. A few skeptical officials were not going to stop her now. And in the end, she won. The adoption was finalized on a rainy morning at the courthouse in the capital city. Stood before a judge and promised to love and protect 6 children who were not her species, not her kind, but who were absolutely her family. Held her hand the entire time. After that, life became something new. Rented a small house on the outskirts of the city. It had a garden that she slowly learned to tend, coaxing strange alien flowers into bloom. It had a kitchen that was too small for 7 people, which meant meals were crowded and messy and full of noise. It had rooms that she filled with beds and toys and drawings and all the small pieces of ordinary life. It had room for all of them. She learned to cook food, though her first attempts were truly terrible. She burned things. She added wrong ingredients. She created dishes that looked like science experiments gone wrong. But the cubs ate everything she made without complaint, and slowly she got better. She learned the lullaby that needed to fall asleep. She learned exactly how liked his blankets arranged. She learned which subjects made go quiet and withdrawn, and how to gently draw him back out again. She learned that healing was not a straight line. Some days the children were fine, laughing and playing like cubs should. Other days the grief came crashing back like a wave, and all anyone could do was hold on and wait for it to pass. On those hard days, held them close and let them cry. She told them that sadness was not weakness. She told them that missing people they had lost was not wrong. She told them that love did not disappear just because the people we loved were gone. And slowly, the hard days became less frequent. Commander visited 6 months after the adoption was finalized. He found in the garden, her hands covered in dark soil, her hair escaping from its braid. The cubs were scattered around her in happy chaos, was chattering endlessly about something she had learned in school, sat quietly in the shade of a flowering tree, reading a book about animals from different planets. The others were playing a game with rules that seemed to change every few minutes. "You look well," observed. Smiled up at him. "I am well." "The council has approved your petition for permanent residence," he told her, "and your application to resume xenobiology research at the local university has been accepted. You will be the first human to hold a faculty position on Prime." I heard. Her smile widened. Apparently my unique perspective on cross-species bonding was considered valuable. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. Politicians always find ways to make things sound complicated. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the cubs play. Had abandoned her endless talking and was now trying to catch a small flying insect that buzzed around the flowers. Was helping one of the younger cubs climb a tree, ready to catch them if they fell. "I never thanked you," said eventually, "for finding me, for bringing me aboard your ship, for giving me a chance to become." She gestured at the scene before them, the house and the garden and the children who had chosen her as completely as she had chosen them. "This." Shook his head. "I did not give you anything. I simply did not get in your way." He turned to face her fully. "Humans have a reputation in this sector, you know, dangerous, unpredictable, territorial. The council advisories say to approach your species with caution." "I know," said. "What they do not mention," continued, "is that humans love with a fierceness that amazes other species. You bond with anything and anyone, animals, machines, aliens. Children who are not even your own kind. He paused. You look at something that needs protecting and you decide without logic or reason that you will die before you let harm come to it. He looked at the cubs again. At, who had given up on the insect and climbed into his lap. At, who stood watch over his siblings like a small guardian. At all of them, relaxed and happy in a way that would have seemed impossible just months ago. That is not dangerous, said quietly. That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. That night tucked each cub into bed. She sang the lullaby for, even though her pronunciation was still not perfect. She arranged his blankets exactly right. She checked his homework and reminded him that asking for help was not a sign of weakness. When the house was quiet, she stood in the doorway of the room the youngest cubs shared and watched them sleep. Their small bodies rose and fell with peaceful breaths. Their faces were soft and untroubled, free from the nightmares that had haunted them for so long. She thought about the cub she had not been able to save, the weight of that small body in her arms, the desperate attempt to keep her warm, the terrible moment when the warmth had faded and left only cold. She would carry that grief forever. She understood that now. It would always be there, a scar on her heart that would never fully heal. But scars were not just evidence of wounds. They were evidence of survival. They were proof that she had endured something terrible and kept going anyway. Stirred in her bed, her eyes opened slightly, catching the dim light from the hallway. "Mother," she murmured sleepily. Crossed the room and knelt beside her bed. "I am here, little one. Will you stay?" Brushed the soft fur from his forehead. Her human fingers were gentle against the alien texture she had come to love. "Always," she promised, "for as long as you want me." Smiled, her eyes already closing again. "Then forever." Kissed her forehead softly, and stayed there until the small cub drifted back to sleep. In the quiet house on the alien world, surrounded by children who had chosen her as completely as she had chosen them, finally understood what home truly meant. It was not a place. It was not coordinates on a map or walls around a building. Home was a choice, a decision made over and over again, every day, to stay and to love and to protect. Home was the stubborn refusal to let go, even when the universe tried to tear you apart. Home was 6 small hearts beating in peaceful sleep, trusting that she would be there when they woke. And the human who had survived the impossible held on to that home with the same fierce determination that had kept her alive in the cold darkness between stars. She would never let go. Not for anything. Not ever.